What is up, guys? We are the group 2 and we will be discussing 3 topics in the subject Philistory. That is the land ownership in the Philippines during the Spain, the 1973 Constitution, and the 1987 Constitution. So, we will discuss the topic by the timeline basis, which is first the land ownership in Spain, then the 1973 Constitution, and then the last is the 1987 Constitution. We have Aljon Arevalo and Jeremy Madrileos to discuss the topic, the land ownership during the Spain era.
Land ownership in the Philippines under Spain. Historically, land-related remedies extended by the past regimes and administrators proves to be totally unable to fulfill the promise of alleviating the quality of life of the landless peasants. The land laws have invariably contained provisions that enabled powerful landowners to circumvent the law or even use the law to sustain the further strengthen their position in power. Pre-Spanish era. Land was not unequally distributed before the Spaniards came to the Philippines. The notion of private property was unknown then. The community or barangay owned the land. Agrarian-related problems were the only source of major conflicts during this time. Land was available in the entire archipelago. The major sources of conflict and rebellion were really the harsh Spanish imposition such as tributo, polo, encomienda, and etc. During the 19th century, several developments occurred that solidified the land tenure system and aroused antagonism over its injustices and inequalities. Since the Spaniards did not levy a land tax or a head tax, and the few records of the land's ownership were kept, the Spanish government issued two royal decrees, Decreto Realanca of 1880 and the Maura Law of 1894. These decrees ordered the caciques and the natives to secure legal title of their lands to suffer forfeiture. The Filipino peasant, either ignorant of the processes of the law or all the Spanish written instructions, were just slow to respond. The landowners were quick to react. They did not only register their own land holdings but also took advantage of the ignorance of the peasants by claiming peasants' lands adjacent to their own holdings. It was estimated that 400,000 Filipino peasants were left without titles. No option was left for those dispossessed. Peasants became mere tenants in their own lands. The Royal Decree of 1894 or Maura Law deprived many Filipino peasants of their own lands through scheming and treacherous ways of both Spaniards and caciques. Other strategies of dispossessing peasants of their land holdings were outright purchase at low price of real estate by a Spaniards or a caciques from a badly in need peasants. Mortgage system. This is equivalent of mortgage system or sangla. The mortgage system is equivalent of today's mortgage system or sangla, where a landowner who was loaned a peasant some money becomes this peasant's landlord. This happened simply because the system required the land to be collateral. While the peasant had no paid back his loan, he paid the landlord rent for use his own land. Before the arrival of the Spaniards in our country, the distribution of land in the Philippines was not equal. The notion of private property was unknown then, but the arrival of the Spaniards disrupted the peaceful life of the Asian Filipino. They used the Filipino for their own personal interest. They took advantage of the ignorance of the Filipino to claim our country. The Filipino at that time thought that the Spaniards were friends, but they did not know that this would make them suffer. Until now, the Spanish conquest of our still has a big impact because here the Filipinos have learned some customs such as mortgaging property where you will use one thing to owe you money. Filipinos have also learned to appointment of a leader who can good or bad to our country. The Spanish conquest brought many brought many things to us. To prevent such an incident from happening again, Filipino must to be wise in choosing their decision and not immediately trust foreigners.
Spanish period, 1521 to 1998. One of the major initial policies of the governorship of Legazpi was to recognize all lands in the Philippines as part of public domain regardless of local custom. As such, the Crown was at liberty to preserve huge tracts of Philippine land as rewards to loyal civilian and military as rewards. In effect, the communal ownership of land gradually and slowly took the backseat. Private ownership of land was introduced. With this arrangement, every municipal resident was given his choice of the land for the cultivation free from tax. Large tracts of uncultivated lands not circumscribed within a given municipality were granted by the Spanish monarch to deserving Spaniards. This kind of ownership became known as the encomienda. The encomienda system in the Spanish colonies began as a result of the royal order promulgated in December of 1503. By virtue of this royal order, encomiendas were granted to favorite Spanish officials and clerics who were entrusted the responsibility to look after the spiritual and temporal developments of the native colonies' territory. In return for such a duty, the encomiendas enjoyed the right to have a share in the tribute paid the natives. Legazpi himself had granted encomiendas to the friars like the Agustinians in Cebu and Manila. Almost all the grants that Legazpi extended to the Spanish official and the friars were confined to what would eventually become the province of Cavite, Laguna, Batangas, and Bulacan. Much later, in place of the encomiendas, the Spanish authorities began to group together several barangays in the administration units. They termed this unit as a pueblos or municipios, which were governed by the gobernadorcillos. Together, the cabezas and gobernadorcillos made up the landing class known as caciques, landing class. At the passing of time, the Filipino caciques intermarried with the Spaniard. This gave such class as a mestizo class, which exists to this day. Through this enviable position, the cabezas, the gobernadorcillos gained more and more stature or prestige with the Spanish civil and ecclesiastical authorities and the common people. This act vested in them great power. Certainly, this did not help to endear them to the ordinary people. In time, the caciques were given the prerogative of collecting taxes as well. This act vested in them great power. Certainly, this did not help to endear them to the ordinary people. Caciquism as an institution became deeply rooted in the Philippine soil. This paved the way to many present-day agrarian problems and unrest. As the cacique system grew, it also became more oppressive. Brought about colonial uprising during the 19th century, which tended to occur in the areas with much agricultural activity such as the Central Luzon.
Thank you, Aljon Arevalo and Jeremy Madrileos, for discussing the topic land ownership in the Philippines during the Spain era. So now, we have Daniel Bermas, Mark John Barnedo, Mark John Balasta, and Lendo Barcenas to discuss the topic, the 1973 Constitution, which is the Marcos regime.
When Ferdinand Marcos declared martial law in the Philippines, he used his constitutionally legal powers to concentrate all state authority in himself. However, this would not be the last time Marcos would use technicalities. in his mandate as lead of state to obtain even greater power. In mere months following September 1972, Marcos had already set in motion an elaborate plan that would eliminate his checks and balances from both the others branches of government and the Filipino people at large. In everything he did, Ferdinand Marcos took great pains to ensure that his action would align with the dictates of the law. When necessary measure fell outside the scope of existing law, he changed the law to suit his needs before proceeding. For implementing such a strategy, his rapid ascent to what seemed at time like absolute power, Marcos has been labeled a constitutional dictator. Hello guys, we are Group 2. And may we present to you our reaction video regarding the issue of the 1973 Authorian Constitution and aftermath of it. In any democracy, checks and balances are vital. The basic idea is that no single individual has all the power, so that he is unable to abuse it. Power is ideally distributed among various bodies so that they may dispense their duties efficiently and balance each other's exercise of authority. The Philippine government is generally into the three branches: the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch. Following the same principle of checks and balances, the President must thus approve laws passed by Senate and Congress, while the Supreme Court may judge the constitutionality of the President's action. Toward strengthening his dictatorial power, Marcos made sure to disrupt this democratic setup. While he already had control of the executive branch as the President, he proceeded to take all over the other function that the government had mandate over. In effect, Marcos gave himself total control over the nation.
It became clear that Marcos could indeed exercise absolute power over the Philippine government. One more thing had to be secured: the indefinite extension of this power in 1935 Constitution in effect at the time of Marcos' first and second term of office, limited the presidency of total to two four-year terms. Marcos' solution: he promulgated a change of constitution which included the replacement of Congress with a single chamber, Batasang Pambansa or National Assembly. The new proposed government would have Batasang Pambansa composed of popularly elected legislators, a symbol head of state in a president, and a prime minister who would be head of government elected by the assembly. The 1973 Constitution, composed of a preamble and 17 articles, provide for the shift of presidential to a parliamentary system of government. The Constitution vests the legislative power in the National Assembly. A Prime Minister is elected from among the members of the National Assembly and serves as the head of government and Commander-in-Chief of the Philippine Armed Forces. A President is elected from among the members of the National Assembly and serves as the symbolic head of the state with a 6-year term. The judicial power is vested in the Supreme Court, composed of a Chief Justice and 14 justices, and apportioned to a jurisdiction of the lower court. All justices of the Supreme Court and judge of the lower court are appointed by the Prime Minister. On August 24, 1970, Congress enacted RA number 6132 otherwise known as the Constitutional Convention Act, for the purpose of conveying a constitutional convention. The 320 delegates met from June 1971 until November 30, 1972, when they approved the draft of the new charter. While in the process of drafting a new constitution, President Ferdinand Marcos declared martial law on September 21, 1972. The draft constitution was submitted by the citizens' assemblies from January 10 to 17, 1973, for ratification on January 17, 1973. President Marcos issued Proclamation number 1102 announcing the ratification of the Constitution of the Republic of the Philippines. The above constitution was amended in 1976, 1980, and 1981. There were minor amendments done in 1984. In the 1973 Constitution, it is stated that the civil government remains supreme, with the military playing a secondary role in the affairs of state. That the American type of democracy, which has been practiced by our people since 90s, did not die. With the ratification of the new constitution, but continues, except that it is now devoid of its righteousness and irresponsibility. That what has evolved from the Marcos leadership is not dictatorship of any kind of variety, but a constitutional authoritarianism dictated by the needs of the times and the particularities of the ideological forces at work trying to destroy our society. That the Marcos doctrine sought its strength, inspiration, and vote of confidence from the people through the citizen assemblies and the barangays.
One crucial provision was that the Prime Minister would retain his power unless the Assembly made it known that they had lost their confidence in him, or the President nominated a successor. Moreover, transitory provision in the 1973 Constitution assigned Marcos a term extension as President, even before the declaration of martial law. A constitutional convention had already been put in place since 1971 to review and propose amendment to the existing constitution. On November 29, 1972, the convention approved their proposed constitution, and the following day it was submitted by the President for ratification by the Filipino people. This move was questioned by some legislators. How could a constitution be ratified by the Filipino people in a state with neither Congress nor free speech? Nonetheless, the President ordered the organization of the citizen assemblies, wherein citizens would be asked whether they approve of the new society, whether they like the reforms instituted under martial law, whether Congress should be open again, and when the Constitution should be ratified. Marcos ordered a viva voce plebiscite on January 10 to 15, 1973, in which the voting age was reduced to 15 to ratify the new constitution. Military men were placed prominently to intimidate voters. Reports indicated that mayors and governors were given quota for yes votes on the constitution, and negative votes were often not recorded. Results report that 90% of the citizens have voted for the constitution, even though some communities did not participate in the citizen assemblies. Over the next few years, Marcos would hold for more plebiscites in 1973, 1975, 1976, and 1978 through citizen assemblies to legitimize the constitution of martial rule. In Proclamation number 1102, Marcos announced that 95% of citizens at the citizen assemblies approve of the new constitution. This announcement was also questioned in a landmark case known as Havilana versus Executive Secretary, wherein Josue Havilana questioned the power
the president to call citizen assemblies and the power of the assemblies themselves to ratify the constitution. Others allege that the citizen assemblies themselves had been conducted unscrupulously with force and deception. However, the case was dismissed by the Supreme Court, which intimidated to prove it. Using the stick and carrot method on the justice of the Supreme Court, President Marcos was able to force the Supreme Court to uphold martial law and the new constitution, therefore allowing the 1973 Constitution to take full effect. Previously, around 80,000 individuals including senators, civil libertarians, journalists, students, and labor leaders were arrested and detained without due process upon the declaration of martial law, with many of them filing petition to the Supreme Court for habeas corpus. They challenged the constitutionality of the proclamation. Marcos had thus succeeded in fulfilling his plans to obtain power. After transitory provision leave out their course, Marcos was named the Prime Minister. He had indeed extended his stay in power. The 1973 Constitution allowed him to hold this position indefinitely, and he did so until 1981, at which point he appointed his finance minister Cesar Berata to the post. Marcos did not consider Berata a threat to his rule, but this constitution did not last too long. With the joint forces of three groups of opposition, they successfully ousted Marcos from power. These forces are the revolutionaries, reformists, and religious opposition.
Since the end of the Second World War, the Philippine economy has had a mixed history of growth and development. Over the years, Philippines has gone from being one of the richest countries in Asia, following Japan, to being one of the poorest. Growth immediately after the war was rapid, but slowed over time. One of the reasons of the economic downfall in the Philippines is from the Marcos era. Yes, we can't deny that if the first terms of Marcos regime, the economy was progressive. We can call that one economic boom, but the economic boom is not sustained in the duration of Marcos regime, and is the last year. Economic problems will soon rise, and there is no transparency during the martial law era. We shouldn't blame Aquino saying that after it's a people power, the economy dropped, because even before Benigno Aquino Sr. assassinated, the economy of the Philippines was getting lower. It was the environment in August 1983 that President Marcos, foremost critic, former Senator Benigno Aquino, returned from exile and was assassinated. The country was thrown into an economic and political crisis that resulted eventually in February 1986 in the ending of Marcos' 21-year rule and his fight from the Philippines. In the meantime, debt repayment has ceased. Real GNP fell more than 11% before turning back in 1986, and real GNP per capita fell 17% from its high points in 1981. In 1990, per capita real GNP was still 7% below the 1981 level. The economy dropped after the EDSA because we are paying the debt Marcos caused. In the history of the Philippines, only the Marcos regime breaks the Phillips curve, wherein as the price of goods are increasing, then the employment rate decrease, but it was not the situation from the Marcos regime. In them, as the price of products increase, the unpayment rate also increase. Yes, the price of the product during martial law are low because population was only 48 million. The demand for the products are not high before the price would be low. Also, it's not true that infrastructure in the country means the country is rich. Yes, Marcos developed many infrastructure during the era, but most of the state funded and most of the era are from debt. Before we got abused to the project and infrastructure, first let us ask if where do the money come from. Most of funds used are from the War Damage Rehabilitation Fund as the infrastructures are rising in the Philippines during martial law. The country debt is also rising.
Thank you for the four of you for discussing the topic, the 1973 Constitution. So now, I will discuss to you now the 1987 Constitution. But first of all, what is Constitution? Very well, a Constitution is a body of fundamental principles or established precedents according to which a state or another organization is acknowledged to be governed. It binds the government and the citizens. So to begin with the topic, let us first know what is the general principles of the 1987 Constitution. So, the general principles of the Constitution, which is the 1987 Constitution, was written in the Article number 2 of that said Constitution, where it says that Philippines is a democratic and a republican state, and we are secular republic, where the church is separated from the state, and there are also principles about the women rights and principles of equality and fairness. Also, there are also principles of property relations and principles on obligations of public officials. So, there are also bright line rules of the Constitution where it is used to set up institutions like institutions of accountability. It is related to what we have learned during the Marcos regime. It leads to the setting up of independent commission like Commission on Human Rights. We have the Ombudsman, that is sort of a police of the politicians and public officials. There is also the Supreme Court that is strengthened. And then the buildings of institution. The separation of powers among institutions is important. The President, the Congress, and the Supreme Court, the three branches of power in the democratic state. The Constitution has significant anti-dictatorship clauses. It happened well because of the EDSA Revolution, where Cory Aquino, as a revolutionary leader, rejected the 1973 Constitution of President Marcos. So, she formed a constitutional commission that will draft a new constitution. So, the context of how to write a new constitution was, let us do all we can to prevent the repeat of the history, which is the martial law. They also said that they need to prevent the concentration of powers in a leader, the plunder of the economy, and the violation of human rights. With that context of the framers or writers of the Constitution, most significant provisions in the Charter are geared towards, well, the dictatorship or authoritarianism. They have control now with the president power to declare martial law. And the Congress now must agree to a declaration of martial law. They will vote if they agree or disagree. The Supreme Court now can uphold or strike down a declaration. There are CHR, which is the Commission on Human Rights, the Ombudsman, and other independent constitutional commissions that is strengthened now and more independent. They are given fiscal autonomy, which means freedom from the outside control. They have the shield. They are shielded from the influence of the President and the Congress, so that when a public official comes along who flouts the rules of the law or the separation of powers, this independent institution can say, "No, we are standing our ground." These are the strongest selling points of this constitution to prevent what happened during the Marcos regime. Other outstanding features of this constitution are social justice. There is one chapter in this constitution that is about social justice. For example, educational rights of women, indigenous communities, and so it is not just about what is called negative rights, the rights of free speech, the right to criticize the government. These special characteristics of this government contains positive responsibilities of the government, like raising the quality of the citizens. It is written in the constitution now. They have the right to improve the lives of the Filipino people. There are also the protection of the environment. We are the one of the most progressive constitution in the world. Another is the RH law, provided by the constitutional basis wherein it aims to raise the state of women and the children's. So we, we can see now the benefits and how strong this constitution is now. So let us talk now what are the weaknesses of the 1987 constitution. The very first one that is always criticized about this constitution is because this constitution is said a lot. In short, maraming sinabi ang constitution na ito. Ideally, constitution area blueprint, not a code, so that the public officials have flexibility. This constitution is too long because in the history of how this constitution is made, people's rights were suppressed for almost 2 decades. So, when they have the opportunity, the constitutional framers put it all there. And the number one effect of it problem is that it makes the interpreting of the charter more difficult. This is one reason why the pending of cases in the Supreme Court is too long. Another is the downside of the separation of powers. Because we get too afraid in the concentration of powers, the process in the government became slow. This makes the governance inefficient by design. Advocates of the charter change, which is the Cha-Cha, says that it is a slow down progress and people are clamoring for change. So the question now is, do we need the change of the constitution to jumpstart change and improve the lives of the Filipino? Well, it depends on what type of problem you want to answer. The constitution has many tools to update itself. There are big tools and there are small tools. For example, we can do one by one amendments just like the United States Constitution that survived almost more than 200 years and amended more than 20 times piece by piece, one by one. We can do it also. For example, if Imperial Manila and revenue sharing is the problem, a revision could be done that removes revenue allotments from political progress rather than a revision process through charter change or constitutional convention, because when this happens, the entire body of charter is opened up and anything can be revised. So, constitutional change should be careful. The decisions are well thought out process. We should identify the problem first. Let us first look who will write the charter, because if we make errors, there is no chance to correct it until the next constitutional revision process. It is a touch move process. By design, our constitution is permanent, and the process of amendment and review of our constitution should be hard, because those who write this constitution wants a permanent constitution. There are provisions for minor changes, but we still don't trigger that type of mechanism. The constitution is for the people. It is not just for politicians or power holders. It is important to bear in mind the Bill of Rights. So, what is the Bill of Rights? These are the rights of the people. This is the list of rights of the citizens. It is a document citizens can use with government, with police, with mayors, or with the president itself, saying that you cannot do something to me because you signed a covenant that gives me the right to criticize you, to say what I want to say because you serve me. This constitution has a robust Bill of Rights. A good institution, a good constitution empowers people. This gives people the right to speak, to comment, or to organize without having the fear of being arrested, detained, or silenced. So, because of that, there is a wisdom to this constitution, especially since this is a anti-dictatorship constitution. It's not perfect, but we should recognize its strengths and weaknesses. So please, let us read our constitution. Makialam tayo dahil may pakialam tayo. Thank you. So this is our discussion for the three topics and I hope you like it. Thank you very much.